Okay, so next up we have Angela Sakal, who is the Chief Perfusionist at Francis Hospital in St Mary's, and she's going to be talking us through the minefield and how to navigate getting the way through leadership. So I'm very interested to hear how you're going to do it.
Well, I certainly don't want to go back to the Venus bag, I'll tell you that. I was so glad to get away from that one. So hello again, thank you all for hanging out. I know it's hot outside and happy hour is quickly approaching. So I'm going to try to be as engaging as possible.
We'll put this here close to you.
All right, thank you. So once again, I have no disclosures. You know how when you meet someone for the first time and they ask you what you do for a living, and you kind of hesitate because you know that no matter what you say, they're just probably not going to get it, but you try anyway. So I've been doing this a long time, 25 years, and no matter what I say or how simple I make it, I usually get, "Oh, are you an anesthesiologist?" "Well, no." "Oh, so you're a technician?" "Well, no, it's a little bit more complicated than that." "Oh, so you're a nurse?" "No, I'm not a nurse." Sometimes I wonder, like, if I tell people that I'm a multitasking ninja, that perhaps that's something that they may actually understand. So then comes the follow-up question. Well, that's such an interesting profession. What's it like to be a perfusionist? Well, it's easy. It's like the mug says, it's like riding a bike. Except the bike's on fire, you're on fire, everything's on fire, but you're not allowed to show that you're panicking. You're supposed to behave like a duck, calm on the surface and then paddling like crazy underneath. So outside my full-time job at St. Francis, I am a clinical instructor and part-time professor at Quinnipiac. I teach a couple classes a semester, and on the first day of class, I say to the first-year students, take a look around and say hello to your new brothers and sisters, because in the next couple years, you're going to spend more time with them than probably with your own family. Because in reality, our pump teams are actually our work families. But we need to understand that all families have quirks. We're not all going to agree. In fact, we're going to disagree a lot. I worked with my first team for 19 years, and we certainly didn't all agree. And when we disagreed, we did it really, really loudly, like only New Yorkers can. Except we did this in private. We would shut the pump room door and we would just go at it, but when the door was open, we were a united front. Now we can yell at each other, but nobody would dare yell at us. So in the end, it's okay to disagree. You just need to respect and protect each other. Well, one day we had an opening, which was rare for us, and we interviewed a bunch of people, and we interviewed a young man, and he was a perfusionist, and he was young, and he was looking for his first job, and we asked him a bunch of questions, and one of the things we asked him was, what is your 5-year plan? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I'm sure you asked this question a lot. So he said to us, well, I want to be chief. So we turned to our chief perfusionist and said, well, I guess we're going to be training your replacement. Well, it turns out we didn't hire him. We found somebody with a little bit more experience. But 5 years later, I'm in a different hospital in a different role, and there he is again. So I asked him the same question because I remembered him. And he says, well, I want to be in a place where I want to keep learning. Okay. So actually, we did hire him. And then I asked him, why was your answer different this time? And he said, well, once I started working, I realized that I had so much more to learn before I would be comfortable being in charge. So it's not only important to have a good team, it's also important to have a good leader. But what do you look for in a leader? Does it depend on your perspective? Perhaps as a student or a new grad or somebody with a little bit experience or somebody with a lot of bit experience, or maybe somebody as a chief or a manager. Now, if you're out there looking for a job and you're interviewing, it's not only about you, it's also about them. They're trying to decide if they want to work with you, but you should be trying to decide if you want to work with them. Anybody remember this show? So this is Boss Hogg from the Dukes of Hazzard, and he was so nasty as a boss that even the dog didn't like him. But have you ever gone into an interview and said in the first couple minutes that, oh no, I will never work for you. Or have you ever interviewed somebody and then decided in the first couple minutes, oh, no way. There's not a chance that I'm going to hire you. So about 1.5 years ago, I interviewed a guy and he looked great on paper. So I said, okay, come on in. We'll have a chat. You'll meet the team. He was there about 10 minutes when he proceeded to tell me that he heard about this one thing that I was doing as a manager and he didn't agree with me. But he was going to let it go for now. I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. You don't know me and we just met and you already don't agree with me. This is not going to work as a relationship. So I have to tell you that he does not work for us. But it should get you thinking, how long does it take to make a first impression? And how important is that first impression? Well, there's actually some science behind this. Any guesses? You have 7 seconds to make a first impression. In fact, there is a study out of Princeton, I believe, that says you have 1/10 of a second to make a first impression. And how does this happen? Well, when you first meet someone, you take in information about them, their hair, their clothes, their shoes. So the term dress for success, that's not a myth. And then you look at their body language and you start processing information about them. And you have formed what they call a first impression filter. And any other information that you get gets processed through that first impression filter. So first impressions happen quickly, very quickly, and they are important. So what do we look for in our leadership? Well, there's lots of information out there. You could read articles, TED Talks, studies, but I was curious because we're perfusionists and we're a rare kind of group. What do we look for in our leadership? So I took an informal survey of people that I knew had worked with students, past students, chiefs, managers that I was in touch with. And I got about 70 responses back, which is pretty cool. And this is what it came down to. People who are students or had a little bit of experience wanted somebody who was a good communicator. People with more experience or chiefs of departments wanted somebody who was fair and open-minded. And the other top 3 things were approachable, honest, and competent. Now, the interesting part is I didn't just get responses, I got comments. And I got a lot of comments. Now, there was way too many comments to share here, but I picked the top 5, and I want to share those with you. So a good leader should surround himself with smart individuals. People want somebody who's bold and has vision. That it's important for a leader to be able to make changes, not just stay stagnant with what may have worked in the past. That there is a mutual benefit in helping others become better. Iron sharpens iron. That too many leaders are burnt out, which makes it seem like it's part of the process, but it doesn't have to be. They want their leaders to be elevating and deliberate. And then I got several of these. Emotional intelligence. We want leaders to have emotional intelligence because otherwise you may end up with a dictator. And they want someone who's going to exhibit a good balance between considerate and no nonsense. Let's talk about me for a second. These are my rose-colored glasses. So I want to work with this person, someone who's going to take risks but is not reckless, who has a profound belief in people's potential and who's going to push them outside their comfort zone. Now, I don't want someone who's going to sit up in a glass tower, look down at me and tell me what to do. I want someone who's going to have some skin in the game. And I want someone who's organized because working with somebody who's just shoveled is so very, very painful. Well, unfortunately, I have some bad news for you. It's likely that you were not born a leader. But the good news is, well, that nobody is. Leadership is a learned skill. It takes time to develop. In the words of Vince Lombardi, leaders are made just like anything else through hard work. Now, I hope this works. Let's take a look at this video.
This guy.
Yeah, John. Look, John, I've told you, if you're going to have to find money, take it from the superannuation fund.
How can we get them across town real quick?
Well, we have access to the helicopter. We just use that.
Got it. We chopper them in.
I don't care if you have to steal it from the employees.
That's why I get the big bucks. That's why I'm here. That's what I want from you guys. Cheers. Who's the boss? I'm the boss. When I say you got to do this, you got to do that.
I am a motivator.
I just don't think that you
No,
can
you
be
can. I've got connections.
approaching me in
I've
the
got
lunchroom,
connections.
threatening me with
I'm
your,
not threatening you. I'm telling you to do your
jaws
job.
like teeth.
That's right.
What's that?
Have a look.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're sending dogs to my house.
Well, I might pay you a visit with my dogs.
You're a slow chain dragger.
I like the aggression.
Well, I don't.
Yeah.
Maybe you keep your aggression to yourself.
I have to.
Okay, guys, cut straight. All right, so I'm going to get you to switch around and, off the top of your head, improvise being a good boss.
What do you mean?
I think it's kind of hard to improvise being a good boss because we need to learn that. And leadership is an acquired skill. And if we're not taking the time to learn to lead, we'll probably end up being the bad boss.
Oh my God, I couldn't have written it. I am so impressed.
So how do we get there? Now, if you've never been, this is the bottom of the Grand Canyon National Park, and it's the start of the Bright Angels Trail. And if you're a halfway decent hiker, I highly recommend this because the views from the bottom are stunning. In fact, the views on the hike down, all 6 miles of it, are also stunning, and the hike up, another 8 miles or so, are equally as stunning. But this is not an easy trail. It is steep, it is rocky, it gets hot. There are dozens of switchbacks, and about 3/4 of the way through it, you start questioning your life's choices. But when you get to the top, you realize that it was such a great experience and it was totally worth it. So why do I show this picture? I think that the journey from staff perfusionist to chief perfusionist, it takes time and patience and perseverance. But in the end, if that's something that you want to do, then you should definitely go for it because it's worth it. Now, I took this picture at 5:30 in the morning, and it took my son and I 7.5 hours to get to the top. Now, that's an elevation of 4,500 feet, but we didn't really have a choice because that's where our car was. So now that you've been put in charge of a department, let's take a look at what's expected of you. Well, you're expected to be a teacher and a mentor for students and new hires, to be a negotiator between your staff and then your staff and other departments, to be a critical incident liaison, to be calm and the voice of reason when things go bad, to be a recruiter to develop your team. You make policy, you're an equipment specialist, because when things go wrong, people come looking for you to either fix it or find somebody who can fix it. And whether you like it or not, if you're using the EMR, you are also an IT specialist. Some of the important qualities to have as a leader, well, you need to be decisive, to make decisions that don't have clear answers, to have difficult conversations, to behave honorably when nobody is watching, to be creative and think outside the box, to be flexible because things in cardiac surgery change often and they change quickly, and to have a positive attitude, even on days when you don't want to be a good communicator, and that involves listening, not just talking, to build relationships, not only within your team, but other departments. And don't forget your executive leadership, because those people are important and nobody is successful living on an island. To be calm and be the voice of reason and think things through. To be dependable, say what you mean what you say, and don't make promises that you can't keep. And to maybe think less about yourself and more about what's good for your department. Now, I went to a conference about 10 years ago in New York City, and the chief of one of the departments did a talk, and he said something that I remember to this day. He said, I like to hire young people because they're usually smarter than me, and that makes my department better, and that's okay. So now that we looked at things that are expected of you and some qualities that you should have as a leader, let's take a look at some of the challenges that we face as leaders. Now, they say that you could pick your friends, but not your family. But as a manager, don't you kind of get to pick your work family? So what do we look for? We look for the ideal candidate. Someone who's a team player, has good clinical skills, is intelligent and hardworking. But how do you find this mythical creature? So there is the resume, and everybody looks good on paper. The accomplishments, the education, it's all right there. Well, then there's the references, and I have yet to come across one where somebody says blatantly bad things about people they're writing a reference letter to. So you kind of have to read between the lines and think about what is it that they're not saying. And then there's the interview, and that's the money shot, because if you're lucky, you get to meet them in person and ask them questions and get a feel and a sense about their character, because you may not want somebody with the best pedigree. You may want somebody who's going to fit well with the people who are already working there. So you really should know your team dynamics and trust your instincts. Because if you don't, you're going to have a team that's frustrated. They're going to perform poorly. They're going to be dissatisfied, start looking for jobs someplace else. And then you're going to have the ever-dreaded high turnover rate. Now, the other thing that we face as a challenge as leaders is the composition of the 21st century workforce. Now, this Purdue study 2022 tells us that 35% of them are millennials. Now, if you look inside your department, you may have a similar composition that looks a little bit like this. Well, unfortunately, the millennials have gotten themselves a bit of a reputation for being entitled, narcissistic, unfocused, self-interested, and lazy. So how do you deal with that? I think that if we understand the mindset between the two generations, that this will help us make better decisions as leaders. So let's take a quick look. So the Gen Xers believe in staying quiet and learning. They believe in paying their dues before getting a seat at the table, and they want a work-life balance. Now, the millennials, they want to be heard. They want their work to have meaning and to have an impact. They want to participate in the decision process regardless of seniority. They want immediate feedback, and they prioritize life. Now, I was standing next to a nurse manager friend of mine several months back, and she was asking one of the nurses to stay for overtime because they had a lot of people on devices, and they wanted to bring down the nurse-patient ratio. And the nurse was adamant that she was not going to do this because her son had a soccer game. And the Gen Xer in me thought, I mean, you don't know how many soccer games I've missed and parent-teacher conferences as my kids were growing up, and I probably would have stayed because that's kind of what we do, but the millennials, they don't think that way. So how do you create a team that's cohesive, engaged, and productive? Well, we need to create an environment of collaboration. We need to be transparent and allow involvement in the decision process. We need to be flexible because quality of life is important and family comes first. We need to give objectives and not tasks. Give the team members responsibility, set standards and parameters, and then let them figure out how to get it done. And then give immediate feedback. And then we need to lead by example. If you're comfortable within your own skills, you could guide your team through examples of your behavior, not just by talking to them or telling them what to do. And the other thing that's a little undervalued as a challenge in leadership is succession. Now, you spend a lot of time building your department and policies and procedures, setting everything up, and one day you may want to retire or move on, that perhaps you want to train somebody to hand it off to and perhaps leave a legacy. The other thing people forget is that managers have multiple hats. They have clinical responsibilities, they have administrative responsibilities, and just because you don't see them every second of the day does not mean that they're not busy. They're just trying to balance the two roles. Now, for those people who are not chiefs of departments and still want to be, it's okay. Just remember that there is a downside of management. Sometimes it's lonely being a leader. Well, somebody said this to me when I took this job, and I thought, what's he talking about? This is great. Well, I tell you, and some of you know that he wasn't kidding. But aside from all that, some of the pitfalls we want to avoid is that we don't want to remain stagnant. We want to embrace innovation, whether it be waterless heater coolers, mini circuits, mobile ECMO, and those of you who still chart on paper, perhaps you want to try the EMR. You want to be thoughtful and not impulsive because you could have done 100 things right, but it's the one thing that didn't work out so well that perhaps that's what you're going to be remembered for. That you want to be proactive and not reactive. Don't let bad behavior continue. Try to mitigate situations before they become explosive. And although delegation is great, that means you have a great team and you can trust them to do what needs to be done. Sometimes too much delegation means that you become detached from daily operations. And as a manager, you should really know what's going on in your department every single day. And then last but not least, be conscious of something called imposter syndrome. So you ask, what is imposter syndrome? It's the feeling that you're a fake or a phony and that you don't belong there and that you got your position because you got lucky, not because of any kind of skill. Now, if you ever felt this way, it's okay because 70% of people in high-powered roles feel this way at one point or another. Now, the original imposter study was done in the 1970s and it focused on high-achieving women. But today, the data says that men and women alike have these feelings. So what are some of the characteristics of people who may feel this way? Well, hard workers, perfectionists, and high achievers. Sound familiar? And the top 4 symptoms are anxiety, perfectionism, self-doubt, and feelings of failure. So how do you turn this negative into a positive? Well, you really should just believe in yourself. You're there for a reason. Just embrace it, own it. Stop comparing yourself to others. If you're not from a big city or a big center, stop comparing yourself to those people. You are not them and they're not you. And know that nobody is superhuman. You're going to make mistakes. Not everything you do is going to be flawless. People are not going to like you all the time. You're going to make people mad. So in the end, what is leadership? Now I was walking down the hallway next to the CMO of my hospital one day, and I asked him, I said, so what do you think leadership means to you? I figured he had a lot more experience than me, and maybe he had some cool insight. So he said, Angela, he said, leadership is leading without trying. I thought, okay. So I walked away, and then I thought, what's he talking about? If you're not born with it, and it takes time to develop it, then how do you really lead without trying? So I'm going to leave you with my final thought, and it's all about your passion. If you're passionate about everything that you do, then perhaps then you can truly lead without trying. Thank you for hanging out and listening to me.